Still Jones. And, our next panel will consist of three people who know a great deal about the Adirondack Park Agency from their personal experience. Former APA Chairman Jim Frenette from Tucker Lake, former APA Chairman John Collins from Blue Mountain Lake, and Bill Kissel, who's the former APA Commission member. We've got a fan club here already. And Bill was also the first staff counsel for the Adirondack Park Agency back in the early 1970s when we were both on the staff there together. So it will be a treat to hear what these gentlemen have to say about today's proceedings and any ideas they may have. And Phil Brown will moderate this discussion.
Okay, so we can all just sit up on the tables. Well, I gotta say, it's been a very interesting day here. We've had a lot of good discussion about changes that might or might not be made to the APA or to the Adirondack Park. A lot of ideas have been shared, and I guess I'll start off by asking each of you what you think is the biggest challenge facing the park and what should be done about it. I'll start with Jim Frenette.
You want the biggest challenge or the biggest change that should take place? Okay. Mine's going to be a little bit different, I think. First of all, I go back and tell you where I come from, and I think that will help explain what I'm saying. In 1968, I was voted a councilman on the town of Altamont, town of Tucker Lake now. And in 1969, a year later, we were faced with a development called Tonda Lake. It was one of the largest developments in the park, and it preceded the Adirondack Park Agency. So it was a big effort to find a way to slow it down before the agency had power over it. So they turned the hearing, they conducted a hearing and turned it over to the DEC. And the DEC conducted a hearing that was a lesson for everybody on how to slow a project down. If you didn't want to, they were waiting for the agency to come, kind of thing. It ended up that, remember now, this is 1969, 1970. I think the transcripts that they had they had an appeal put in when the decision went against them, and the cost of the transcripts alone that they had to prepare to bring to court were $20,000. So the developer said, "See you around," kind of thing. And what I'm getting at is basically public hearings. The next public hearing that came along was, of course, the one for the park agency itself, and that was followed by the hearings for the state land, which was followed by hearings for the private lands, which was followed by eventually for the rivers, wild and scenic rivers hearings, and all of them had something in common. They just got the people all excited and really anti-APA. The next big hearing was in 1990, and at that time I was a county legislator, and I was a member of a group called the Inter-County Legislative Committee for the Adirondacks, and it had one representative from each of the 12 Adirondack counties. We met once a month, different places around the county, and we rotated the chairmanship. In 1990, I happened to be the chairman, and what was coming up was the Governor's Commission for the Future of the Adirondacks in the 21st Century. And I made the comment that 12 people on this group we had was too big to handle this particular issue. We should form a subcommittee, which we did, which eventually became known as the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission went to Albany the day that they were going to release the plan. There were no hearings on this now at this point. And the chairman of the Planning Commission was a friend of my brother's, and I got to know him, and it was Peter Burley, that some of you I'm sure remember or know and knew. And I talked to Peter at the beginning. What they had done, the Planning Commission had the plan, and they had it converted into law form and had it on the desks of the assembly in Albany before anybody read it. And we're standing there in this gathering, and I said something to him about, they had put in it that there was going to be a moratorium on building for a year. And I said to Peter, you have to hear there's a moratorium on building. I said, is that part of the plan? He said, whatever is in the plan is in the plan. You take it all or you take nothing. I said, you understand by saying that you're drawing a line in the sand. You're taking people like me that might be considered reasonable and saying I can't go along with this because I can't support a moratorium for a year on building in Tucker Lake or any of the places in the Adirondacks. Take it or leave it kind of thing. Well then, most people left it. I think the governor left it for a while. But eventually, in a short time, he learned of the Planning Commission. He had a big meeting with us in Plattsburgh, and he anointed the Planning Commission as being that group that would negotiate with his staff for changes in the 21st century plan. Now, there are some 200 recommendations in there that any of you that read it know that there's some great things in that, some things that really we should have had. But because of the idea that you had to take it all or nothing happened, we began to negotiate with it. And I'll make this brief, but we were a bona fide group representing all 12 counties in the park, and we ran into a storm. That was close. We ran into a storm of, who are you guys to negotiate for us, from other people who were involved in local government or who were just bystanders who said, we don't like the idea that you're negotiating with the governor, we don't like this thing. Well, it turned out, I think it was in 1992, that the Planning Commission met the wall of opposition from others in local government, and we were disbanded. And if you go to Albany, I think there's a cellar, a basement somewhere, with a bunch of shelves, and if you look at one of those shelves, you'll find the 21st Century Commission report. Nothing happened to it, and it's a shame because it was a great document. And I bring that up because I think the need for the agency to have, and they haven't demonstrated it so far, is basically the idea of education of the people as to what you're trying to do. Most of the time, we talked about the color of houses. And I see Bill Kern sitting there. When I first got on the agency, I brought that up with him. And he kind of laughed at me. And I said, I go back to Tucker Lake and all they say is, yeah, they're trying to tell us how to paint our houses. Well, we made one little change in it. And we put in, they must be earth tone colors. I think that was it. That was the issue, okay? But by saying you must paint it the color we tell you, that didn't fly. But changing the wording made it fly, kind of thing. Okay, so there's a way to do it. Now, what I'm getting at is, whatever is recommended by these two gentlemen, or whatever is recommended as a result of this meeting, is going to be controversial. Bet on it, okay? But if there's a way, and I don't know the way, but I was thinking, John Warren was just here, and he mentioned Adirondack Almanac, and I got fooling around with that on the computer. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a blog and it has all kinds of comments. And most of the comments are what you'd expect from some of those blogs, but nonetheless, they're revealing as to the tenor of the people. Okay? This is going to be, whatever it is, if it's clustering, more definitive, if it's the type of hearing, type of design and so on, anything that changes, or people perceive as a change, gets the dander up kind of thing. So my thinking is, if there's a way to present it to the people, even before it becomes a written down, or even before it has to be written, but even before it's ready for legislative act or what, if that's necessary, so that the people are aware of what you're talking about. Somebody mentioned in one of the hearings of the presentations this morning, I think, that once people know what you're trying to do, they can get behind you. But if you say to them, this is what you're going to do, then they'll get behind you all right, but it's not the kind you want. So my advice to the agency is figure out a way to do the hearings. This is I'm talking about the electronically challenged person of anywhere around, all right? I mean, I can plug the toaster in and I can turn the computer on, but from then on I'm confused. But there's a brand new world out there of communication with people. And the agency hasn't picked up on that yet, I don't believe. But if they did, if there was some method to find, the issue is get it out to the people beforehand, get them on your side beforehand, and then when it comes time for a formal hearing, you're not going to be fighting with each other, okay? There's an understanding there that's important. So the bottom line to me is education of the people before. Somebody once said, make friends before you need them. Well, that's kind of like what I'm talking about. You can make friends with the people by showing them why it's important. Everybody loves the Adirondacks. But, okay, then they get into the don't tell me what to do kind of thing. I think Phil, you said it this morning. Well, there's that strong feeling there. I want to live here because this is what it is. But they'll support you. They'll support if they can see the value of it, and if it isn't threatening to them, and it isn't threatening to people if they really understand what it's all about. Okay? My message.
Thank you, Jim. Well, before I give the mic to Bill, I want to just ask one follow-up question. I was interested, you said that the Cuomo plan was a great document, and it had a lot of good stuff in it. Could you elaborate a little bit? What recommendations in the plan did you agree with that you think would be good for the park?
I can jump that a little bit by saying the planning commission was meeting with the governor's staff. We had the commissioner of the DEC. We had, he sent his good guys, the top guys down to deal with us. He was serious about it. And one of the members of our committee said, did you guys all read the whole thing? No. Okay. Your assignment for the next meeting is take a sheet of paper, put down agree, disagree, I don't know. So we started reading it, and then there was probably 8 of us at that next meeting, and we all agreed. We were amazed at how many things we agreed with. But there were things on education, there were things on medical, there were things on roads, different schools. It just was, forget the if you will, the actual environmental issues. But there was a lot of plus in there for the Adirondack residents. And to their credit, I think I can say this, to their credit, the agency saw the value of some of those recommendations. And I don't know how they worked into the regulations or how they work, but they didn't simply dump the ideas that were in there. But they saw the value of them, and they appeared in different form. But offhand, there was 240 of them, and at my age, I can't remember my kids' names.
Thank you. Bill, I'd like to hear from you now.
Don't ever sit in the middle. You see what happens? You gotta follow this guy. Talk back to follow, Jim. The question that was asked was, what do I see as the biggest challenges of the park agency? And frankly, I don't think they've changed a lot in 40 years. The agency's understaffed and underfunded. I think in the past, sometimes that's been purposeful, sometimes it's been neglectful. Whatever the cause is, it has dire impacts because the agency's mandate in the programs, regulatory and otherwise, that it has to administer are overwhelming. And if you look at the size of the staff and the budget of the staff, in addition to the fact that it's here in the Adirondacks, which is great for us that live here and those of us that may have been involved with the agency, it's a real burden. And I would like to see the day where we have a governor and a legislature who would step up to the plate and say, we are going to give you the resources you need to implement the incredibly large task we've given you. And I know Chairman Ulrich and others continue to face that challenge and do what they can about it. Secondly, I think, and this hasn't changed much either, and Jim was referring to it to some degree. There's a fine line between doing your job and successfully implementing the challenging legislation that's there, and not doing it on the one hand in such a way that people will say, well, you know, you're just giving it lip service. You're not being strict enough. You're not putting enough conditions in the permits. You're not enforcing the law. Or on the other hand, this pendulum swings back and forth repeatedly, having people say, you know, you are so bad we want to abolish you. We are going to do all we can to make your job difficult. And again, Chairman Ulrich and the current administration at the agency, I think, has done a wonderful job. You know, the common ground effort and the kind of relationships we have now, we would never have seen. And some of that is, yeah, times have changed. Dan Steck sits here, and I remember I happen to live in his district and have since 1973. There was an assemblyman there, who won't go by name, but some of you remember who he was, would have caught Dan within 10 miles of here today. And I was chatting with Dan about that, and he said, well, Bill, you know, don't give me too much credit, times have changed. And I said, yeah, they have, Dan, but I still want to compliment you. And part of what he meant by that was, I can tell you that I've literally met the children of some of our most fiercest adversaries, and they were tough to deal with, Jim. And they say, you know, we're glad you're there. We need the park agency. So times have changed, but query whether they've changed that much. And the final challenge that I would mention, Phil, was what we saw today. I was pretty overwhelmed, frankly. I think we're going to talk about that a little more here. You didn't ask that question at the moment, but particularly relative to the conservation design and cluster concept on the one hand, and the storm runoff, if I can call it that, on the other. The Act's 40 years old. 40-acre zoning at one time, not only in the park but throughout the nation when it was created, was, in some people's minds, the epitome of open space development and design. I think a lot of us believe probably things have changed a lot. That may not be relevant anymore. But that's a matter of opinion, too. There's going to be a lot of people in the park and some out of the park who will say, 40 acres? My God, how much do you need? Or why are you talking about new regulations or even new legislation? So that's going to be a challenge. How's the agency going to deal with this? This is here. I think Bob Glennon had the early insight on it. By the way, I'll give you a little sidekick on Bob. I love it when he comes to the agency meetings and the chairman asks everyone in the audience to introduce themselves. Bob inevitably says, Bob Glennon, washed up environmental lawyer. I don't know whether we're washed up commissioners, Jim. But I'm Commissioner Collins. But thank God your daughter's here. Thank you for you're anything but washed up. You're inspiring. Anyway, I think Bob had the early read on this, like, hey, 42-acre zoning doesn't do it, folks. If you got a huge tract of private land and you whack it up into 42-acre lots, guess what you've done? You just destroyed a tremendous amount of open space. And in those undue adverse impact criteria in the agency law, which the agency has to look at in approving or disapproving a project, of course, open space is there. And it has no less significance than all the other environmental factors. So, you know, the challenge is maybe to get on board and realize, yeah, times have changed and the law has to be looked at and quite possibly reformed. What law has been around for 40 years and has never been touched and doesn't need some improvement? I don't know if this one cries out for that. So that's kind of the challenges as I see them, Phil.
Anyone want to have to follow those two? Okay. Let me just back up just a touch to say with Jim, you know, the Governance Commission on the Adirondacks in the 21st century. I'm the only person I really know that agreed with every single recommendation. Even though I didn't understand how TDRs would work, I still think they must be a good idea. And as Jim said, I think we've seen a lot of those recommendations work their way into the everyday understanding of the environmental community and the agency. And that's good. There's some more that need to. I was tickled to hear Chris Nowitzki's comment, it should be shall, which of course is true when I think of, does the agency consider undue adverse impact? It should be shall. And cumulative impact, it should be shall. The long run says, if you don't take those things into consideration now, if you just look at a proposal, a development proposal, as to its effect today, you've missed the point. You're not going to do what the park demands. And I'll jump in a little bit and get into trouble, but I've done that before. I think that until the governor and the rest of us recognize and sign on to the concept of the Adirondack Park belonging to all the people of the state of New York, being a huge treasure to the people of the United States and to the world, and that it must be treated that way. And until the governor and his commissioners treat the park that way, then it won't be given the kind of protection that will make it last for the next several hundred years. I think it was Governor Rockefeller said there, we protected the park for the next 100 years. That was 40 years ago. I'm not sure he was right then. I know he's not right now unless we can enhance the protection provided by the Adirondack Park Agency. I think today we heard ways that we can do that. I think if we can, if the agency can, focus on water quality more than it has done in the past, if we can say, well, development is development, but pollution is pollution. We don't want pollution, and I think many of us recognize that there is a considerable relationship between development and pollution. But if we can say, going to Jim's point of the way you present the question, if it's pollution, how many are going to say, oh, I like pollution? What's wrong? Why do you need to amend the law if it's only pollution that's bothering you? So, I think there's a track, there's a go there. I think that the Adirondack Park Agency is the most important thing in the park. The most important political thing in the park. Obviously, the resources are the most important thing in the park. But for the park agency to be able to meet the challenges that it faces all the time, does it need more staff? Of course it does. Does it need more funding? Of course it does. The Lake Tahoe example is staggering, isn't it, Lonnie? But again, as I think everybody knows, I think the world of the park agency and the job it's done, the job it is doing, but there's a huge job left to do, and I hope that the agency can be well-funded and well-staffed and well-intended enough to do it. Thank you.
Well, this conference is focused on water quality and conservation design. And, there's been a lot of conferences on many topics in the Adirondacks. We're hoping that out of this conference might come some real change. And so I'd like to ask each of you, sticking with the topic of conservation design for the moment, what's the best way to go about ensuring that conservation design does become the norm? Is this something that would require legislative approval? Could it be done through regulations? What is the best way to go about it?
Well, I want to challenge a little bit the precept. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that conservation design and clustering is always the answer in the Adirondack Park. And I'm not giving you a personal opinion now. Personally, I tend to favor that view, but I think it would be naive for us to sit here, and we're the choir, frankly, and I would observe the choir isn't very big. And again, Dan Steck, when asked whether legislatively there might be a receptiveness in Albany, if you listen to his answer carefully, he was very specific. He said, you know, we can't agree in the Adirondacks, let alone in Albany right now, about what we should do with our own land. He was talking about state land classification, which those of you that are following the agency know is a fairly hot topic. It's a hot topic politically right now. And then he went on to say, basically, if you want this stuff to come to Albany, you better get out and work for it. You better lobby for it, and yes, John, and yes, Jim, you better educate people. So, I mean, that's the first thing. Now, let's jump beyond that, so I don't sound like too crass a lawyer, and say, okay, we all agree we should have conservation design, we should have the kind of a wonderful cluster development that's been discussed here. You know, I come with a lot of baggage. I'm a lawyer. You know, lawyers throw cold water on everything. I noticed some of you were already sleeping out there before we got up here, so a little cold water might not be a bad idea. I also happen to be a former staff member and a former commissioner, as you were told, so I have a prejudice on some of this stuff. But I think on cluster design, maybe could be done. Maybe some of it could be done by regulation of the agency. My own mind says probably going to have to be done by some additional legislation. It was nice talk by a number of the folks that preceded us today about this is what should be done, and I think one gentleman, the leading expert in the country who's here, said you just do it. You don't go to Albany to do it. But he mentioned, I think, two examples. One in Maine, I think one out west someplace. I understood they were both legislated. Certainly, the gentleman from New Jersey made it clear to me that there was legislation there. If those folks needed it, you know, maybe it's pretty controversial in New Jersey, but I don't think anything's more controversial and remains so, as I mentioned, than the Adirondack Park Agency and the Adirondack Park Agency Act. So believe you me, if we try to do that by, shall I call it administrative fiat, there's going to be a firestorm, and it's going to be challenged politically and legally. So I think certainly the challenge to the agency and its staff and its commissioners with what we've heard here today, what are you going to do about this issue? Are you going to address it? Are you going to see it potentially as part of your implementation program? And if so, what authorization do you need? There's an analogy here. The agency recently changed rules and regulations, and a lot of people thought they were illegal, and 4 of those went to court. And a Supreme Court Justice, a local Supreme Court Justice Mueller, upheld 2 and threw 2 out. The appellate division upheld the same 2 and overruled him on the other 2. So the agency won, as we lawyers like to say, on all 4. But here's what Judge Mueller, who was a trial lawyer in Glens Falls before he became a Supreme Court Justice, and obviously he's a fairly conservative guy, had to say, and some of us were wondering, especially as lawyers, can the agency just sort of flip back, and this was the expansion of structures within the setback of lakes and shorelines, which were sort of grandfathered in the agency for 40 years almost. It said you can go ahead and expand those laterally. So, you know, some of us would say, well, that's an increase in the nonconformance. The agency didn't read it that way, and then one morning the agency woke up and said, you know what? We don't think you should be able to expand laterally. You can't be able to expand backwards or upwards. You can't expand that building that's within the setback that's pre-existing. And there was quite a howl, and some local government entities and others challenged that in court. So Judge Mueller says, and I'm quoting, the agency, talking about the park agency, having stepped back and reviewed Section 811.5, after some 35 years of existence, has determined that any structure, including expansions which themselves are structures, erected within the setback, is jurisdictional and would require an agency variance to proceed. petitioners, and these would be the people that were challenging the agency's change regulation, of course, maintain the agency is trumping the intent of the legislature, as expressed in the same section. So I mean, if it's done properly, there's certainly some room, even though some people would say, hey, you're changing the legislation. I just question as a lawyer, and I think I would if I were a commissioner, whether the agency could make that change to mandate clustering. I'm quite interested in what Dave Gibson said, and Peter Bauer and I know had this discussion when I was on the agency, that the law mandates that the commissioners in effect implement this. And I respect Dave's opinion, but I disagree with it. And I would tell you that as a commissioner, when Peter and I had some friendly jousting over this issue, my own mind as a commissioner didn't take me there. And I dare say, although I'm no darling of the environmentalists, I'm probably greater than a lot of the current and former agency members. So if I couldn't get there, and I'm not sure I could get there today if I was on the board, I've got some education to do.
I've often thought either we should all be lawyers, or there shouldn't be any lawyers. Because, it's dangerous to disagree with the lawyers, but it's fun. It's fun. Right. I think, my experience at the Adirondack Park Agency, and especially as chair, I think that the Agency Act, as it is today, give the agency commissioners and staff great leeway in how they make decisions. When I was in the agency, Bob Brennan was the executive director and chief counsel, and we didn't lose lawsuits. You know, we were sued all the time. We were, you know, the AG's best customer. And we were always sued. We didn't lose. As in this case, if we lost at the first level, we picked it up at the second. The law says that the agency has the discretion, the power to make the kind of decision to protect the park. No undue adverse impact, no, you want to check the cumulative impact, and all the other resource-based decisions that need to be made can be made by the agency as it is presently constructed. That's my cut on it. Are there ways that the Agency Act could be improved? Of course there are. But I don't say until we get the Act improved, we can't save the park. That's not true. I don't think that's true. I think let's try and improve the Act, but in the meantime, let's buckle down and protect the park.
Okay, I guess we've run out of time, so I hand the mic back to Dick.